September the 29th, 2002. Dear Mr. Blair, you may remember me. We met at a Norwegian leather industry reception at the House of Commons in 1999. I am writing to thank you for warning me about the imminent threat to Cyprus posed by Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. I had booked a week's holiday in Paphos for me and my eldest son at a total cost of £571 plus airport tax. My travel agent, Johnny Bond at Late Sun Limited, demanded a deposit of £57.10. I immediately cancelled the holiday, but my problem is this, Mr. Blair. Late Sun Limited are refusing to refund my deposit unless I furnish them with proof, A, that Saddam Hussein has a stockpile of weapons of mass destruction, B, that he can deploy them within 45 minutes, and C, that they can reach Cyprus. Would it be possible to send a handwritten note confirming the threat to Cyprus so that I can pass it on to Late Sun Limited and retrieve my deposit? I remain, sir, Adrian Mole. Saturday, October the 5th. I viewed a loft apartment at the old battery factory, Rat Wharf, today. It is in a great location, 5 minutes walk along the towpath from the bookshop where I work. The loft has one huge room and a bathroom with glass brick walls. Mark Bastard, the estate agent, told me that a scrap metal multi-millionaire is hoping to transform Rat Wharf into Leicester's equivalent of the Left Bank in Paris. I told Mark that, until very recently, I was the full-time father of 2 boys, but that the British Army was looking after Glenn, the 17-year-old, and the 9-year-old William had gone to live with his mother in Nigeria. I said that at 34 and a half, it was time I put myself first for a change. After he pointed out the integral granite cheese board in the kitchen worktop, I agreed to buy the apartment. Before we left, I went out onto the balcony. The canal lay below me, sparkling in the autumn sunshine. A fox walked along the towpath with a Tesco's carrier bag in its mouth. A brown creature, a water vole I think, slipped into the water and swam out of sight. A flock of swans floated majestically by. The biggest swan looked me straight in the eye, as if to say, "Welcome to your new home, Adrian." I informed my parents that I would be moving out of their spare room and into a loft apartment in Rat Wharf in Leicester at the earliest opportunity. My mother said, "Isn't that where the Rough Sleepers hostel is opening next year?" I said, "You've been misinformed. The whole area is being transformed into Leicester's cultural quarter." At 7 o'clock, we listened to the news. Britain's military chiefs were demanding to know what their role would be if Britain goes to war with Iraq. Share prices had fallen again. When the Archers theme tune played, my parents reached for their cigarettes and sat listening to the agricultural soap opera with their mouths slightly open. They are doing things together in yet another attempt to save their marriage. My mother and father are elderly baby boomers of 59 and 62 respectively. I would like to see them wearing beige car coats and polyester slacks, but neither of them will give in. They are still squeezing themselves into stone-washed jeans and black leather jackets. Monday the 7th. I had to wait outside the shop this morning. Mr. Carlton Hayes had trouble finding a parking space. Once inside, he leaned against the recent biographies to catch his breath. I said to him, "If we had a few chairs and sofas in here, you could sit down and be comfortable." He said, "We're not Habitat, Adrian, my dear, we're booksellers." We had the usual quotient of mad people in during the day. However, just as we were about to close, a young woman came in and asked if we had a copy of Soft Furnishings for Your Regency Doll's House. She had the thin wrists and fingers I like in a woman, so I spent some time pretending to search the racks. She told me that she had a collection of 18 dolls' houses and that she had made most of the soft furnishings herself. I mentioned that I would need some curtains when I moved into my new loft apartment and asked her if she would be interested. She said the longest curtains she had ever made were only 6 inches in length. I told her that I would consult the internet when I got home. "My name is M. Flowers," she said. "I haven't got a mobile because of the health risk, but you can contact me on my parents' landline." Mr. Carlton Hayes told me that she works in Country Organics, the health food shop in the marketplace. This evening I found a book on the internet called Miniature Embroidery for the Georgian Doll's House. I immediately rang the number she gave me. A man answered. "Michael Flowers here, to whom am I speaking?" I said I was from the bookshop and would like to speak to Ms. Flowers. The man shouted, "Marigold, chap from the bookshop." Marigold Flowers. No wonder she didn't give me her full name. She asked me to order her a copy of Miniature Embroidery. When I put the telephone down, I felt that odd mixture of joy and fear I feel just before I fall in love. Wednesday the 9th. A letter from Glenn. Deepcut Barracks, Surrey. Dear Dad, I'm sorry I have not wrote to you before. I have been very busy doing my basic training. It is nothing but shouting and being sarcastic. Some of the lads cry in the dormitories at night. Will you come to my passing out parade on Friday, November the 1st, Dad? I would like Mum and Grandma and Grandad to come. I seen Pandora on the telly the other night. I told some of the lads that she used to be my dad's girlfriend, but nobody believed me because she is posh and a member of Parliament. Warmest wishes, your son, Glenn. P.S. Tell Grandma Pauline she has got to wear a hat. It is the law. Why did he need to add your son? How many other Glens do I know who are in the army? Thursday the 10th. Nigel called in this afternoon after his appointment at the hospital eye clinic. He is supposed to be my best friend, but it is over 6 months since I saw him. I was shocked at how much he has changed. It's obviously been a while since he'd seen his hair colourist. He told me the consultant said his sight had deteriorated so much that he was going to put him on the partially sighted register. I desperately searched for something positive to say, but could only come up with, "You've always enjoyed wearing dark glasses, Nigel. Now you can wear them all year round without people thinking you're a prat." I rang Computer Cabs, and while we waited, I suggested to Nigel that he learns Braille. He said, "I've never been good with my hands, Mole." I asked him if he could still see colours. He said, "I can't see anything much." I helped him into the cab and told the driver to take him to his parents' house on the Homestead estate near Glenfield. Nigel said in a bad-tempered way, "I can still speak, Mole." I hope he is not going to become one of those bitter blind people like Mr. Rochester in Jane Eyre. Saturday the 12th. The miniature embroidery book was delivered this morning. At lunchtime I took it to Country Organics. Marigold was prescribing lima beans to a miserable-looking woman with low-level depression. I asked Marigold if she would like to meet up after work one evening for a drink. She said that she wasn't very good with alcohol. "Coffee, then?" I said. "Coffee," she said, as though I had suggested fresh pig's blood. I said that I had heard that red wine was good for the circulatory system. She said, "All right, I'll join you in a glass of red wine, but you'll have to give me a lift home. We live in Beeby on the Wold, and the last bus leaves Leicester at 6:30. When I got home, my parents informed me that they had decided to sell the house. "We are going to buy a wreck and do it up," my father announced. I left them poring over the Leicester Mercury property guide. I hadn't got the heart to throw cold water onto their mad plans. Neither of them would know what a joist was if it sprang up and hit them in the face. Monday the 14th. No reply from the Right Honourable Tony Blair. Wednesday the 16th. I met Marigold in the Euro wine bar. Conversation was difficult because of the noise. I asked Marigold if she liked Chinese food. She said, "If I'm careful with the monosodium glutamate." I took her to Wong's. The waiter, Wayne Wong, whom I have known since our school days, seated us next to the giant fish tank where koi carp costing 500 quid a throw were swimming about. Marigold said, "I find them a little intimidating." I put my hand on hers and said, "Don't worry, they can't get out of the tank." She said, "It's just that they're so big. I prefer small things." This is the first time since I became sexually mature that I have worried that a woman will find my genitalia too big. I can't wait for our next meeting. Friday the 18th. It was freezing cold in Marigold's house. Apparently, Michael Flowers doesn't believe in central heating. He believes in wearing layers of wool and keeping busy. In the loft, Marigold went around switching the lights on in the dolls' houses. I was enchanted with the first few. The delicacy of the stitching on the furnishings was awe-inspiring, and when Marigold demonstrated the flushing toilet, I was gobsmacked. But by the time I had inspected the 18th, I was more than a little bored. However, I feigned interest. When we were walking to the car, I held her delicate hand. I wanted to ask her to marry me, but I fought the impulse. Saturday the 19th. At lunchtime, I took Marigold a copy of What Not to Wear by Trinny Woodall and Susanna Constantine. Somehow, she has not realised that pop socks should not be worn with a mid-calf skirt, or that lime green shoes are not a good idea. When she saw the title, her lower lip trembled and her eyes filled with tears. She was obviously touched. There was a man behind the counter wearing a hairy tree-patterned jumper, obviously hand-knitted by a friend or an enemy. It was Michael Flowers. I hated him on sight. Monday the 21st. My solicitor phoned to say that there is an £8,000 shortfall on my deposit. I told him that I had £4,000 worth of hard-earned savings in the Alliance and Leicester Building Society, and that I hoped to borrow the rest somehow. I phoned my bank and explained my predicament to the woman on the end of the line. She said she would send me a bank loan application form. Tuesday the 22nd. Saw Marigold after work. She was wearing a tartan plastic Alice band. Thursday, October the 24th. A letter from Barclays arrived with a blank cheque attached. The letter said, "Dear Mr. Mole, the attached cheque can be used where your Barclay card may not be accepted, e.g. payment of utility bills, home improvements or school fees. Please see conditions on reverse of this statement." A cheque for £8,000 made out to my solicitor is now safely in the system. I could be moving into my loft in a week. Friday, October the 25th. As I was filing my financial papers away into my fireproof cabinet, I read the letter from Barclaycard that came with their blank cheque. I was horrified to read that the interest rate is 21.4%. I phoned my friend Parvez, who has just passed his accountancy exams. Parvez said, "If you pay the minimum each month, it's going to take 13 3/4 years to pay off and will cost you over £26,000 if interest rates don't go up. You've fallen into the compound interest trap, Moley, innit?" Tuesday, October the 29th. Sharon Bott came into the shop this afternoon. She had been shopping at Evans for clothes to wear at Glenn's passing out parade. I introduced her to Mr. Carlton Hayes. In doing so, my two worlds collided. Sharon Bott, the mother of my first illegitimate son, Glenn, represents the venality and weakness of my flesh, whereas Mr. Carlton Hayes personifies my intellectual and cerebral self. I told Sharon that Glenn had invited us to a party to celebrate his passing out. I added I had no intention of driving back from Surrey in the early hours due to my poor night vision. Wednesday the 30th. Spent the evening trying to book 3 cheap hotel rooms in the deep cut area, but the only rooms available were ridiculously expensive. I was forced to book 2 doubles, one for my parents and one for me and Sharon Bott. I will sleep on the floor if necessary. Saturday, November the 2nd. My father filmed the parade on his mini video camera. During the inspection, General Frobisher Nairn, an extremely tall man in a dress uniform with many medals, spoke to Glenn for a full minute. Afterwards, I asked Glenn what the General had said. He asked me where I was from, Glenn said. I told him, Leicester, sir. He said, Leicester, isn't that where they make Walker's crisps? I said, yes, sir. He said, do you like crisps, Bot? I said, yes, sir. And which flavour do you prefer, Bot? I said, cheese and onions, sir. Then he said, splendid, Bot. And I said, thank you, sir. I didn't say anything to Glenn, but quite frankly, Diary, I was disappointed at the banality of their exchange, especially at a time when there is talk of war in the air. We didn't stay long at the party. My parents made fools of themselves dancing to Let's Twist Again, and I think Glenn was relieved when we announced that we were going back to the hotel. Before we left, one of his mates, a timid-looking soldier called Robbie, took our photograph. Glenn stood in the middle, and Sharon and I put our arms around his shoulders. Glenn looked ecstatic. I felt a pang of sadness that Glenn grew up without a mum and dad who lived together in the same house and loved each other. I had been hoping that the room I was to share with Sharon would have twin beds, but it was not to be. I went into the bathroom and changed into my pyjamas. When I came out, Sharon said, Adi, no offence, but I don't dog around no more, so don't expect nowt tonight. Then she went into the bathroom and emerged 5 minutes later wearing what looked like biblical robes and got into bed. I lay awake for a while and wondered what Marigold would say if she could see me and Sharon lying side by side. Would she understand, or was she the jealous type? Tuesday, November the 5th. My parents have found a couple of pigsties on the outskirts of Mangold Parva, half a mile along a farm track. There is planning permission for conversion to 2 dwellings. However, they have no water, gas, electricity or main drainage. I advised them against it, but madness has taken them over. They are going to live in a tent and do the conversion themselves. Wednesday the 6th. Mr. Carlton Hayes had his little Roberts portable tuned to 5 Live for Prime Minister's Question Time. We heard Mr. Blair telling Parliament that he had just spoken to President Bush, who told him that there would be a UN resolution announced at 3:30 saying that it was all right to go to war with Iraq. Mr. Carlton Hayes asked me what my opinion of Tony Blair was. I said I admired and supported him and trusted him implicitly. Thursday the 7th. Went to Parvez's house. He has set up business in his spare bedroom. He has bought a home office from IKEA and a black leather swivel chair, but one wall is still covered in Postman Pat wallpaper. He interrogated me about my financial position. Then he said, "You can't move into that loft apartment for a start, Moley. You don't earn a loft apartment salary." I told Parvez that it was too late, that I had signed the papers and that the money had been transferred. Parvez said, "Do you want me to give you some financial advice, Moley?" I said, "No, I can't afford it," and went home. Friday the 8th. 4 p.m. Marigold came into the shop and asked me if I would like to accompany her to a concert the Madrigal Society is giving in Leicester Cathedral. She said her father was singing a solo. He is a countertenor. 5:30 p.m. I am waiting for Marigold. I don't know where this relationship is going. I can't think of a more horrible way to spend a Friday night than sitting in a cold cathedral listening to Michael Flowers singing In a Woman's Voice. Midnight. Marigold and I walked to the cathedral arm in arm. She was wearing a red beret and a khaki trouser suit. I didn't say anything, but she looked like a paratrooper on leave. Perhaps she is subconsciously preparing herself for war. Later, in Wong's, I asked Marigold if she had ever considered leaving home. She pushed a clump of bean sprouts around and said that she had expected to be married by now. Saturday the 9th. Marigold rang to say that her parents had told her I was an admirable young man. I didn't have the heart to tell her that I had been awake half the night wondering how I could end the relationship. Sunday the 10th. My mother has made some change of address cards on her computer. Their new address is going to be The Piggeries, The Bottom Field, Lower Lane, Mangold Parva, Leicestershire. I said, "Aren't you being a little premature?" She said, "No, we bought the pigsties at an auction yesterday afternoon." Nobody ever tells me anything in this house. I'll be glad to see the back of it. I rang Nigel. He has been living in his parents' granny annex since putting his London flat up for sale. His sight has deteriorated even more. I asked him if he wanted to go and see The Lord of the Rings with me. He said, "No, it all takes place in Middle-earth in half darkness." I asked him if his hearing had improved since he had gone blind. He said, "Yes, I can now hear a page being turned in Hey on Bloody Why. Aren't I a lucky boy?" Monday the 11th. It should have been a happy occasion, but as I signed the documents which committed me to paying a monthly mortgage on Rat Wharf, I could not help remembering Parvez's warning. I pick the keys up on Friday. Thursday the 14th. I need to buy a futon, new bed linen, simple but stylish kitchen equipment, a table and 2 chairs for my balcony, bookcases, and a television. The problem is I have no money at all. When I explained my predicament to my mother, she said, "Nobody uses money anymore. Everybody I know lives on credit. Get yourself a store card." Friday the 15th. My address is now a prestigious one. Unit 4, the Old Battery Factory, Rat Wharf, Grand Union Canal, Leicester. It is entirely to my taste, very spare, very masculine, and very hard-textured. I opened my sliding door and stood on the mesh balcony, gripping the steel rail which overlooks the canal. A gang of swans immediately swam up and began hissing aggressively. The biggest one, who for some reason reminds me of Sir John Gielgud, the great classical actor, was particularly vicious. From my vantage point above the water, I could clearly see several supermarket trolleys, milk crates, and what must have been hundreds of lager cans lying on the bed of the canal. The water had a curious noxious smell that was certainly not there when I viewed the property in October. Marigold rang to ask how I was enjoying my first afternoon in my new apartment. Why didn't I tell her the truth, diary? Why didn't I tell her that after spending time with her, the world seems a darker place devoid of joy and hope? She is coming round tomorrow after work. Saturday the 16th. I went to Debenhams and confessed to a kindly woman in the furniture department that I had no money. She agreed with my mother that a store card would solve my problems and pointed out to me that should I activate the card today, I would get a 10% discount on everything I bought. Within a quarter of an hour, I was given £10,000 worth of credit. I should have had somebody with me, somebody sensible. Did I really need a white toweling bathrobe and a home entertainment centre with a cinema screen and Dolby surround sound? Was a white sofa with non-detachable covers a wise choice? I also bought an aluminium bistro table and matching chairs for the balcony, a wine rack, a bottle of extra virgin olive oil which Debenhams import from an olive grove owned by a close friend of Gore Vidal's, a dualit toaster, and a cafetiere. The last 2 items are loft living must-haves. Marigold gave me a housewarming present. A collection of hanging feathers which she called a dream catcher. Its purpose, apparently, is to catch my dreams and make them come true. I didn't tell her that I have a recurring dream whereby Pandora Braithwaite MP falls to her knees and begs me to make love to her. Marigold watched me unpack my home entertainment centre and was horrified by the amount of packaging materials that came out of the boxes. We were soon having a heated discussion about the Earth's resources. I should have told her there and then that I no longer wanted to go out with her, but my courage failed me, and I heard myself accepting an invitation to have Sunday tea with her parents. Sunday the 17th. I slept uneasily on my new futon. I woke at 5 a.m. and worried for an hour about having tea with the Flowers family. I then read half a chapter of John Major's autobiography. It never fails to get me back to sleep. I was next woken by the sound of my father's voice shouting, "Get back, you bastards, get back!" I went to the balcony and looked down. The swans had surrounded my parents on the towpath. My father held a copy of the News of the World in front of him as though it was a rapier and he was the Count of Monte Cristo. My parents walked around the loft in silence. Then my father said, "It's just one big room." My mother said, "It'll be all right when you've got some carpet down." She gave me a postcard from Glenn, who is on a week's leave in Tenerife. Dear Dad, me and the lads are having a great time. Don't worry about me missing the holiday we was going to have. I will be going to Cyprus with the army soon, ha ha ha. Best wishes, your son, Glenn. I escorted my parents back past the swans, and I swear to God there was a sneer on Gielgud's beak. What has he got against... Sunday, November the 17th, 2002. When I arrived chez Flowers, Marigold came running out to meet me. She said nervously, "Don't mention that you live in a loft, or that your father used to sell electric storage heaters, that your parents smoke, that you have a son in the army, or that you were once an offal chef in Soho. And please, please don't mention Mexico." I had bought Netta, Marigold's mother, a bunch of flowers from the BP garage. When I gave them to her, she said, "How perfectly lovely, a forecourt bouquet, I'm sure I can revive them." She hurried off as though she was rushing them into intensive care to hook them up to a heart and lung machine. A sulky girl with extraordinarily long hair banged in and snarled, "I've been ordered to tell you that tea is ready." It was Poppy, Marigold's middle sister, who had returned home temporarily to recover from an unhappy love affair with a fellow maths teacher. I was handed a plate of stodgy brown lumps. These turned out to be scones made by Netta using stone ground flour that was posted to her from a windmill in Somerset. Michael Flowers said, "We try to eat much as they did in the Middle Ages, before our food became adulterated." I took a scone. It tasted as if it had been baked in AD 1307 over a fire made of twigs and dried cow dung. The talk centred around the absent Daisy, Marigold's eldest sister, who was in public relations in London. The more Netta, Marigold and Poppy slagged Daisy off, the more I liked the sound of her. Apparently, she was ruining her health and her feet by teetering from premieres to book launches wearing skimpy clothes and 5-inch heels. Tuesday, November the 19th. When we were reorganising the travel section, I asked Mr. Carlton Hayes if he had any children. He said he had a son who was in a secure mental hospital and a daughter who worked in Ethiopia distributing food for UNICEF. He said, "Leslie and I are awfully proud of them." Then added quietly, "Both of them." I have no idea if Leslie is the mother of his children or a male soulmate. Parvez paid me a visit tonight. He admired my new furniture, then asked me awkward accountant-type questions. Eventually, I admitted I'd got a store card. He clapped his hand to his head dramatically and said, "Where is it?" I took it out of my wallet and handed it to him. He searched his pocket, found a small Swiss Army knife, prized out the mini scissors and cut my card in half. He said, "You'll thank me for this one day." I didn't tell him that there was only £89 left to spend on it and that I owed Debenhams £9,911. Parvez asked me if I was going to the Neil Armstrong Comprehensive Reunion on Saturday night. I said that wild horses would not drag me to such an occasion and that the thought of seeing my old classmates filled me with horror. Wednesday the 20th. After work, I took Marigold to Wong's. She was wearing what looked like a giant romper suit in pink fleece fabric. Wayne Wong asked me if I was going to the Neil Armstrong reunion. He added, "Pandora's coming up from London." "Oh, darling, why don't we go?" Marigold said to me. I didn't like her use of the word we. I said I thought I would be busy on Saturday night. She said, "I haven't met any of your friends. Are you ashamed of me? And when am I going to meet your parents?" I said, "It wouldn't be good for you, Marigold. They both chain smoke." She said, "I could have a puff of my inhaler before being introduced." I was careful not to make a definite arrangement to see her again. Friday the 22nd. I sent a text to Bruce Brainbox Henderson, who is organising the Neil Armstrong reunion, saying I would be there. I asked Mr. Carlton Hayes about Michael Flower's aversion to Mexico. He said that Flower's first wife had been Mexican, but she had failed to settle in Leicestershire and had eventually run back to Mexico City with a pork butcher from Melton Mowbray. Saturday the 23rd. I picked Nigel up on the way to the reunion. There was a frustrating wait while he stumbled around the granny annex, looking for the white stick he has taken to using since he almost fell into a workman's trench. I made no attempt to help him, as I have often heard blind people on the radio going on about how much they resent other people doing things for them. After long minutes of fruitless searching, Nigel said, "Mole, for God's sake, give me a hand." We were greeted at the door of the assembly hall by an old bald bloke wearing glasses. It was Brainbox Henderson, who was an old fogey at 35. Barbara Boyer and Victoria Louise Thompson were standing at the makeshift bar, slagging off the absent Pandora, saying that she'd done nothing for women since she'd been in government. I asked Victoria Louise what she did for a living, and she said, "I marry increasingly older men, darling." Later on, I heard her saying, "I can't remember the last time I peeled a vegetable. I think it must have been 1995. There was an excited murmur when Pandora made her entrance. I am, of course, still madly in love with her. She has spoiled me for any other female. She is a 10 out of 10 woman, whereas Marigold is, tragically, 2.5, or perhaps 3 on a good day. Afterwards, Pandora, Nigel, Parvez, Barbara, Victoria Louise and I went to Wong's. I asked the waiter to take Nigel's chopsticks away and bring a fork and spoon, explaining that this would make life easier for Nigel as he was almost blind. To my astonishment, Nigel had a mini temper tantrum and demanded the return of his chopsticks. At 11:45 p.m, my mobile rang. It was Marigold. I left the table and walked over to the fish tank. A large carp swam to the glass. It looked disconcertingly like Marigold without her glasses. I said to the fish, "Look, Marigold, this is not working for me. Perhaps we shouldn't see each other again." She said, "I've spent all evening working on a loft apartment doll's house. It was going to be your Christmas present." The carp in the tank continued to stare mournfully at me. Eventually, Marigold rang off, saying in a flat voice, "There's no point in living without you." Nigel broke up the party by saying he had to get up early in the morning because a woman from the RNIB was coming to interview him to vet his suitability for a guide dog. Sunday the 24th. Parvez, being a Muslim, was the only one sober enough to drive. He took everyone home, then dropped me and Pandora at Rat Wharf. We stayed up talking until it was almost light. She told me about the terrible workload she had and how the press monitored her every statement. She said it was a relief to be able to talk openly and freely with an old and trusted friend. Then she laughed and said, "It's a real shame that we weren't sexually compatible." I pointed out that her theory had never been tested. However, I made no move in that direction, and neither did she. At 5 a.m. I rang for a taxi. When I heard the horn in the car park, I escorted her to its door. My mobile rang at 7:30 a.m. It was Marigold, reminding me I had promised to go to lunch in BB on the Wold. It was a gruesome meal, a meatless, flavourless repast served with cloudy homemade beer. Marigold's eyes were swollen with crying. After I had done all the washing up and drying, I joined her in the attic. She was laying strips of varnished wood onto the floor of a loft apartment doll's house. On a mini balcony, sitting on a little metal chair, was me, Adrian Mole, wearing a white bathrobe and glasses. On the other chair was Marigold, wearing her khaki trouser suit and red beret. The two dolls were holding hands. I noticed with alarm that on the middle finger of each doll's hand was a matching gold-coloured band. Marigold said, "I've got something to tell you. Please sit down." Marigold threw her head back and gazed into the eaves. Then she said, "I have decided to offer myself to you. Sexually, I mean. It may surprise you, darling, that I am relatively sexually inexperienced, but I now feel that I am ready to put my heart, my soul, my body into your care." I felt my genitals wither as she spoke. I told her that I was unworthy of her, that I was vastly sexually experienced, that I was an unpleasant, devious person who would break her heart one day. But this seemed to excite her, and she lunged at me, then fell on my lap and kissed my neck. As you know, diary, my neck is my Achilles heel. One thing led to another, and within the space of a minute I was fumbling with her bra strap. She said, huskily, "Slide the board into the hatch." It was some time before I realised that this was not sexual linguistics, but that she literally wanted me to secure our privacy by sliding the cover over the open hatch to the attic. It wasn't long before we were engaging in sexual intercourse on a pile of old fur coats. As soon as I had come to my senses, I asked her if she was on the pill. She said that she didn't believe in putting chemicals into her body. As I write this diary, I wish that I had not put anything into her body. Monday the 25th. Marigold came into the shop at lunchtime and said, "I told Mummy and Daddy that we had become lovers. Mummy gave me a box of organic condoms. The latex is made in Malaysia under fair trade conditions. Daddy said that you can sleep in my bed on Saturdays and Thursdays." Thursday the 28th. Spent an uncomfortable night in Marigold's single bed, which is the shape of Cinderella's coach. In the morning, I woke to find parallel lines running down one side of my face, having been pressed against a carved pumpkin all night. The sex was fair to middling and lasted about 7 minutes. Saturday the 30th. My parents came into the shop to look for building manuals. My mother said, "You could do with a few chairs in here, Mr. Carlton Hayes, and the smell of coffee is always attractive in a bookshop." He said, "Do you think so, Mrs. Mole?" She pointed to the boarded-up chimney breast, "And you could unblock that fireplace." While I served a late surge of customers, Mr. Carlton Hayes and my mother began to plan to convert the shop. Had sex with Marigold in coach bed, as ordered by Mr. Michael Flowers. Monday, December the 2nd. A letter from Glenn. Dear Dad, I think the war might be kicking off. We done some desert training today. We emptied 10 tons of sand on the assault course, and Sergeant Brighouse made me and the lads stand behind the heap. Then he started the generator up and sand blew in our eyes. He was shouting, "You're in the bloody desert now, you O-level rejects." Then he made us take our boots off and fill them with sand. Then we had to put them back on and run round the assault course until we was knackered. Then he shouted, "Right, that's your desert training done. All the best, Dad. Your son, Glenn." Thursday, December the 5th, 2002. Received an invitation to a New Year's Eve party from Tanya Braithwaite, Pandora's mother. It is fancy dress. Saturday, December the 7th. I was slightly nervous all day at work. I had given my parents a spare key to my apartment, and an engineer was calling at 11:30 to connect me to over 200 television channels at a cost of £66 a month. I will find the money somehow. A man of my intellect cannot afford to ignore global culture. When I got home, my father asked me if he could watch the Miss World competition. He said, "We've only got terrestrial and the BBC are refusing to show it." I have watched the Miss World competition with my father since I was a small boy. In those halcyon days I knew no better. My father would spend an hour before the competition drawing up 2 charts, one for him and one for me, with points for face, bust, legs, bum, and niceness. It was one of the few activities that I ever shared with him. Iraq has presented the United Nations with 12,000 pages of documentation about their weapons programs. So it looks as though war has been averted. Thank God. Sunday the 8th. Marigold rang me and begged me to come for lunch. She said she couldn't talk over the phone and started to cry. I wanted to shout, "I would sooner eat my own arm than drive 15 miles and spend 5 or 6 hours with your family." But I didn't. She ran out of the house to greet me as I parked. She was wearing harem pants, a plaid shirt, and the tartan Alice band. I said, "So what's happened?" She said, "Mummy and Daddy might be getting a divorce. They've called the family together to talk about it. Daisy has come up from London and Poppy is here. I need your support. But please don't be offended by anything Daisy might say. She's half Mexican." Daisy Flowers sat next to me in the dining room. Her perfume was overpowering. Her black hair was piled on top of her head and skewered together by what looked like a thin bone. She had dark olive skin and her breasts wobbled like the jellies my grandma used to serve up for Sunday tea. She was almost, but not quite, as beautiful as Pandora Braithwaite. She said, "Hello, Adrian. I know everything there is to know about you. Marigold is never off the phone to me." Her voice was deep. I asked her if she had a cold. She laughed and threw her head back, exposing her lovely throat. I wanted to sink my teeth into her neck. Poppy said disapprovingly, "Daisy has been smoking since she was 13. That's why she sounds like a mating walrus." Michael Flowers got to his feet and announced, "This could be the last meal we eat together as a complete family unit. My darling wife informed me last night that she is about to embark on a sexual adventure with Roger Middleton." Various brown baked things were put onto plates. Michael Flowers said, "I would like to open the debate. The question is, should Mummy and I have an open marriage, or should we divorce, sell the house and shop, and go our separate ways?" When nobody said anything, he said, looking at me, "Come on, family, what do you think, eh?" I grew alarmed. For some inexplicable reason, he was treating me as though I were a member of his family. Marigold said, "But Daddy, I want you and Mummy to live in this house forever." Netta said, "Oh, darling, you're being a teensy-weensy bit selfish. You'll be getting married yourself and leaving us one day, won't you?" "Perhaps one day soon." The Flowers family looked at me en masse. Daisy said to me, sotto voce, "If I were you, I'd run while there's still time." The meal ended in tears and recriminations. I said, "But nothing has been decided. Is Netta going to sleep with Roger Middleton or not?" Netta said, "I will decide by visiting a rowan tree at midnight. If an owl hoots after I have sung my rowan song, I will sleep with Roger in an open marriage. If the owl is silent, I will divorce Daddy and take him to court for half the value of this house and half the value of the shop." Then, to my horror, she sang the rowan song. Daisy, quite cruelly I thought, gave an owl impression. I started to clear the table, but Michael Flowers said, "I'd like to see you in my study." I went, because anything was better than staying in a room with 3 weeping women. Flowers was sitting behind his desk. He said, "Adrian, you and I have so much in common. I too despise sport and low culture, and I, like you, adore Marigold. I honestly feel, Adrian, that you are the son I never had. Please say that I can lean on you in the dark days to come." He held his hand out. What could I do, diary, but take it? Tuesday the 10th. Mr. Carlton Hayes arranged for 2 armchairs to be delivered today. They are covered in worn brown velvet. I sat by the fire in one and checked his stock list. I was asleep within minutes. When I woke, Marigold was sitting in the opposite chair. She asked if I would join the Mummers group and play Joseph opposite her Mary. I told her that I was an agnostic and couldn't possibly take part in any religious enactment. Marigold said, "Mummery simply means mime. It has its roots in paganism. Mummy and Daddy were founder members of the New Secular Society." I told her that a combination of mime and madrigals was my idea of hell. Friday the 13th. My credit card bill arrived. I was gobsmacked to see how much Barclays were charging me per month for the money I had borrowed for my deposit on Rat Wharf. Sunday the 15th. Marigold rang me 11 times tonight. I didn't ring her back. She makes me unhappy. Monday the 16th. Barclaycard are a truly magnificent organisation. I received a letter from them today which said, "As a valued Barclaycard customer, we are delighted to advise you that your credit limit has been increased to £12,000. Your new credit limit is available to use straight away." Tuesday the 17th. Marigold came into the shop at lunchtime and said, "If I had known that falling in love with you was going to make me so miserable, I would have frozen my heart against you." After she'd gone, Mr. Carlton Hayes said, "Forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn, Adrian, but that young lady seems to have you wrapped around her little finger." Diary, I should have fallen on his neck and confessed that I needed to talk to him about my Marigold dilemma, but pride would not allow me to be open and honest with him. The truth is, I never want to see Marigold or her horrible family again, though I exclude Daisy from the above statement. I would like to see a lot more of Daisy. In fact, I would like to see the whole of Daisy. Every inch of her. Saturday the 21st. After work, I sat on the balcony. With a sinking heart, I saw Gielgud swim across the canal. I told him to push off, but he stayed there, motionless, trying to stare me out. Eventually, his wife came to join him, and 2 pairs of eyes glittered in the darkness. I wondered how long they had been together, and why they had been attracted to each other in the first place. I envied them their relationship. Suddenly, adrenaline surged through my body and propelled me out of the door and into my car. I drove to Be Beyond the Wold and waited outside the Flowers' empty house. It was 11 o'clock before they arrived home from their mumming. Marigold opened my car door and sat next to me. I said that I had something to tell her. She said despairingly, "Oh no, not again. Why does this always happen to me? Why do men satisfy their lust and then throw me aside like a dirty tea towel?" I told her I was not worthy of her, was not ready to commit, etc. There followed 10 minutes of loud crying, 5 minutes of silent weeping and sniffing, and a couple of minutes of broken-voiced pathos. I was relieved when she said, "I'm going to bed. I just want this dreadful day to be over." I gave her a friendly pat on the shoulder and said, "Well, it's goodbye then." I drove home with my ABBA tapes playing at full volume. I think I must have broken the speed limit several times. It felt as though the car had wings. Sunday the 22nd. Michael Flowers rang me at 8:30 this morning to tell me that Marigold had been admitted to the Royal Hospital with suspected appendicitis. He said, "She's in a great deal of physical and psychic pain, Adrian. She needs you." Marigold was in an observation ward. When I gave my name, the nurse on the desk said, "Oh, you're the fiancé." I should have contradicted her and asserted my single status, but she was already halfway down the ward. Marigold held her little hand out and started to cry. She said, "I'll be in hospital for Christmas, and I so wanted us to spend our first Christmas together, Adrian." She had completely blanked our conversation of the night before. We sat in awkward silence and watched Scooby-Doo on television until her mother and father turned up. Netta gave Marigold 6 cards. One was an invitation to Tanya Braithwaite's New Year's Eve fancy dress party. Monday the 23rd. My parents came into the shop. They were doing their last-minute Christmas shopping. My mother asked me what I wanted for Christmas. I told her to buy me rope so that I could hang myself. She said, "Why are you so mardy-arsed? Unless you tell me otherwise, I'm buying you 2 pairs of Calvin Klein underpants. I hope you are coming to Wisteria Walk for your Christmas dinner. It'll be the last time, as we're moving out the day after Boxing Day." Tuesday, December the 24th. At 11 this morning, Netta Flowers rang to say that Marigold was safely home from the hospital. She said, "She's anxious to see you, Adrian." I was about to make my excuses when she added, "Marigold is very low. Even Daisy can't lift her spirits." I said I would go over this evening. At 4:30, my father rang to say that a notice of my engagement had appeared in the Leicester Mercury on the family announcements page. He said, "Your mother has took it hard, Adrian. She's gone to bed with a double dose of Prozac." I immediately ran out and bought the Leicester Mercury. The notice was in a box. It said, "Michael and Netta Flowers are delighted to announce the engagement of their precious daughter Marigold to Adrian Mole. We wish them peace and spiritual fulfillment for the future. Wedding arrangements to be announced at a later date." My blood ran cold. Tuesday, December the 24th, continued. As I drove to Be Beyond the Wold, I caught occasional glimpses of families preparing for Christmas Day. I thought about William in Nigeria and Glenn in his barracks in Aldershot, and hoped they had checked their emails where I had posted electronic Christmas greetings. In my heart, I knew that they would have preferred a proper card. Marigold was in her Cinderella coach bed. She gave me my Christmas present and insisted that I open it in front of her. It was the loft doll's house. She had made many additions since I last saw it. It had a swan on the balcony, and there were 2 children. The boy looked like me, and the girl looked like Marigold. The detail was amazing. She had made a minuscule dualit toaster and a cafetiere. She said, "Do you like it?" I said, "I don't know what to say." She said, "I've worked day and night on it. I've hardly slept." I said, "You must rest now. Stay in bed over Christmas, and I'll see you in the new year." Marigold said, "But we've hardly seen each other since we got engaged." I held her hand and said, "We're not really engaged, are we, Marigold?" She said, "No, not without a ring." I gave Marigold her present and asked her not to open it until the morning. I didn't want to see her disappointment. It was a rare, unsigned copy of Awfully Good, my cookery book, published as a tie-in to the TV series. Before I left Marigold's bedroom, I said very clearly, "So you agree we're not engaged?" She nodded and sank back into her pillows. Daisy was downstairs in the drawing room, shivering next to a miserable log fire. She wobbled a bit on her high heels. I realised that she was very drunk. She said, "I knew Marigold would get you. She always got her own way when she was a kid. You don't love her, do you?" I shook my head. She said, "Tell her quickly and get it over with. She doesn't want a long engagement." I said, "I've told her that we are not engaged." Daisy said, "So you're free, are you?" She reached out and removed my glasses. She said, "I like the way your hair curls on the back of your neck. Don't cut it." Then she said, "Come for Boxing Day lunch. I need an ally." When I put my glasses back on, the world seemed to be suffused with colour. Wednesday, December the 25th. Woke with the usual adult disappointment that there was not a sack of toys at the end of my bed. The sky was grey and it was drizzling. Why can't the weather give us a break for once and snow on Christmas Day? Drove to Wisteria Walk. The atmosphere in my parents' living room was more Pinter than Dickens. There was a Christmas tree in the corner of the room, but it was a scraggy affair. My father said, "I miss William. Remember him last Christmas, Pauline? He loved that drum kit we bought him." My mother said, "Please, George, don't mention that precious little boy's name. I can't bear to be parted from him." "And I'll miss having a few drinks with Glenn," said my father. He was somebody to go to the pub with. I went into the kitchen and stuffed the turkey. There were still some ice crystals inside the bird, but frankly, diary, salmonella poisoning seemed quite a welcome prospect. My mother urged me to ring William. I did so reluctantly. He told me that his stepfather had bought him a new bike. As he chatted on about his new life and his half-brothers and sisters, I felt a powerful longing to hold him in my arms and sniff his skin and hold his sticky little hands. My mother took the phone from me and my father crowded next to her. I left the room and sat on the stairs. It is a horrible thing to see your old parents crying. The hall was full of packing cases and boxes. The bed I had slept in since childhood had been dismantled and was leaning against the wall. I was reheating the Christmas gravy when Glenn rang me on my mobile to say that he was being posted to Cyprus. He said he was leaving tomorrow morning at dawn. I didn't like the sound of that word, dawn. It was suggestive of urgency and danger, and I felt my stomach churn with fear for him. When I told my parents that Glenn was going overseas, my mother's face drained of colour. She said, "Not Iraq." I told her that Glenn was too young at 17 to be sent to Iraq, but he was old enough to go to Cyprus. However, diary, I don't like to think about the boy being out of the country, not with the world in such turmoil. Thursday the 26th. I woke with a sense of excitement but couldn't remember what I was looking forward to. Then I remembered. I would be seeing Daisy Flowers. I managed to sit next to her at lunch. She asked me how Christmas Day had been. I said it had been hell. She said, it couldn't have been worse than here. Poppy's hair got caught up in the Magimix, and Daddy got drunk on his foul mulled wine and started to cry about Mummy and Roger Middleton. I pulled a cracker with Marigold. The novelty was a plastic ring. Marigold asked me to put it on the third finger of her left hand. When I did so, she shrieked, "Look, family, look, I'm properly engaged." How we all laughed. Netta said, "I'm sure as soon as the shop's open, Adrian will be buying you something rather splendid." I realised then that Marigold had not informed her family that the engagement was off. If it hadn't been for Daisy holding my hand under the table, I might well have broken down. Friday the 27th. My parents moved to the top left-hand corner of a muddy, windswept field today. We battled to erect the tent, then sat in the camper van while the wind screeched and moaned and rocked us as though we were in a cabin cruiser on the high seas. As I trekked across the field towards my car, I was overcome with sadness, because at least they had each other, and I had no one to share my troubles with. Saturday the 28th. Mr. Carlton Hayes told me that he'd had a talk with Leslie over Christmas, and I am to be given the title manager. I am in sole charge of ordering new books, meeting reps, buying a coffee machine, setting up a computer, and going online. He did not mention raising my salary, but I expect this was a simple oversight. Sunday the 29th. Brainbox Henderson phoned me. He had heard that I was associated with the Leicester Madrigal Society and wondered if he could join. I gave him Michael Flower's phone number. Marigold rang to ask what I was wearing to the fancy dress party on New Year's Eve. I said, I will probably go as the French writer Flaubert. She said, shall I go as Coco? Then Gielgud honked so loudly outside the window that the rest of her words were lost. It would make a change to see Marigold dressed elegantly for once. Monday the 30th. I drove by Wisteria Walk and said goodbye to the empty house. There had been some happy times there. Not many, but certainly some. I drove to the piggeries to check my parents had survived the night. There was an evil wind blowing when I got there. Half of the tent had blown down and was flapping in the wind. My God, it is a desolate place. Tuesday, December the 31st. I went to the fancy dress hire shop in my lunch break. I took a copy of Madame Bovary with me and showed Flaubert's portrait to a gormless assistant. He went to the back of the shop and came back with a black wig, a curly black moustache, a floppy cravat, and a velvet smoking jacket. When I looked in the mirror, I was quite pleased. I was the first guest to arrive at the party. Pandora opened the door to me, wearing her usual belly dancer's fancy dress costume. She asked who I was meant to be. I said, isn't it obvious? I'm Gustave Flaubert. She said, no, Adrian, it is not at all obvious. I was mortified when it was not Coco Chanel who emerged from a taxi, but Coco the clown. Marigold was wearing an orange fright wig, a large checked jacket, hooped trousers, a bowler hat and flapping comedy shoes. She had completely misjudged the rules of fancy dress, that young women should dress alluringly. It was only women as old as Tanya Braithwaite, who was dressed as a carrot, who could break this rule. When I remonstrated with her, saying, you've got a passably good figure, why hide it under a clown's costume? She said, I thought it would be fun. I tried to explain to her that clowns were not fun, and in fact were deeply unfunny, even sinister. She took the false red bulbous nose off that she was wearing and blew her own. Tanya Braithwaite came out to greet Marigold and said through a slit in the carrot, "Adrian, why is it that your women seem to spend most of their time weeping?" Then the carrot put her arm around the clown and led her off to be introduced to my family and friends. My mother and father turned up as Dolly Parton and Saddam Hussein. Parvez and his wife Fatima had come as Robin Hood and Maid Marian. Parvez said, "I hope you're controlling your spending, Mole." I didn't tell him about Barclaycard's generosity in increasing my credit limit. Fatima said, "I've just been introduced to your fiancée. She's obviously got a sense of humour." I said, "She is my ex-fiancée, Fatima." Fatima said, "You'd better tell her that. She's talking about an April wedding." I glanced across the room at Marigold, who was talking earnestly to Brainbox Henderson, who had flattered himself by coming as Tarzan. In my opinion, he should not have worn the black shoes and grey socks. At 1 a.m, my mother and the carrot started reminiscing about Ivan Braithwaite, to whom they had both been married, though not at the same time, of course. The carrot said, "Poor Ivan, dead for 2 years and 2 months today, Pauline." My mother batted her huge false eyelashes and said, "I still feel responsible for his death." The carrot said with a viper's tongue, "Pauline, you mustn't blame yourself. I'm sure you didn't make him swim back 1/2 a mile to that small island to see if you'd left your sunglasses on a rock. And if you did, how could you have known that he'd get cramp and drown on the way back?" I thought it wise to intervene at this point and led my mother away. At around 2 a.m, I slid the patio doors open and went outside for a breath of fresh air. The stars blazed in the black sky, and once again I felt a boyish wonder that the same moon was shining on me in Ashby de la Zouche, on Glenn in Cyprus, and on William in Nigeria. I wondered how Daisy was spending the first few hours of the new year.
Adrian Mole and the Weapons of Mass Destruction by Sue Townsend was read by Harry McIntyre, abridged by Sarah Davies and produced by Alexa Moore. It was a peer production for BBC Radio, first broadcast in 2019. And in the second omnibus next weekend, it will be New Year's Day 2003. And a hangover is the least of Adrian's problems on a day out with his new love.
Great Lives on BBC Radio 4 Extra.
Here we go. Play the tape.
So what it is to see a picture of a man who's achieved a dream after all these years.
I really felt as though I was going to win. It was predestined somewhat. I really felt that. I felt that things just seemed to work out. Period. I was destined to win this one.
The great Arthur Ashe, on July the 5th, 1975, reflecting on his victory over Jimmy Connors, the brash 22-year-old everyone had nailed on for the win. Arthur Ashe was the 16-1 outsider. He'd won Grand Slams before in Australia and the US, but this time no one really gave the older man a chance. Except Arthur. It seems he really knew he was going to win.
Arthur, two things particularly occurred to me during the match about your demeanour. One was that it seemed that you were...
Wednesday, January the 1st, 2003. I woke up this morning and was horrified to find Marigold next to me on the futon. She was still dressed in a few pieces of her clown outfit. I was completely naked. She put her arms around me and said, "You're a wonderful lover, Adrian. Our love-making went on for hours." "Hours?" I questioned. "Well, at least 20 minutes, she said. I was appalled by the thought that I could have been in any way sexually excited by a woman dressed as Coco the Clown. What does this mean? 20 minutes is good going for me. I tried to remember how much I had drunk the night before. My head was pounding, and my mouth tasted so vile that I was surprised my tongue had not fled from it in disgust to cower in a corner of the room. When Marigold went to have a shower, I wrote my New Year's resolutions. I will never see marigold flowers again. I will work out how much money I owe. I will read aloud to poor blind Nigel on a regular basis. I will email William and Glenn on a weekly basis. I will prove to Late Sun Limited that Saddam Hussein does have weapons of mass destruction and get my deposit back. Friday, January the 3rd. Thank God Glenn is not 18 until April. The war with Iraq will be over by then. I picked up a copy of Survivalist in W.H. Smith. There was an advert inside for a biological and chemical protection full body suit. I may send for one. Rat Wharf is very near the epicentre of Leicester. I visited my parents in their field after work and found them in a pitiful state. It was very hard for me to leave them shivering over their tabletop Calagas heater. Tuesday the 7th. The car park at Rat Wharf is like an ice rink. Gielgud and his wife looked like a bad-tempered Torval and Dean this morning. I rang my mother on her mobile and asked if the camper van was still iced up inside. She said, "I'm chilled to the marrow and your father's hands are blue. We haven't had a hot meal for days." I reassured her that, according to Michael Fish, the cold snap would soon be over. Went to bed but couldn't sleep. Got up and phoned my parents and invited them to stay in the car park at Rat Wharf. They said they might take me up on the offer. Friday the 10th. The camper van was outside this morning. I entrusted my parents with a key and allowed them to use the facilities while I was at work. However, I stressed that this was strictly a one-off act of mercy. Monday the 13th. Mr. Carlton Hayes has sold some Marks & Spencer shares and raised the capital to buy a computer for the shop. I rang Brainbox Henderson at Idiotech, the company he runs which specialises in providing technological services for idiots. According to Nigel, he works an 18-hour day to blot out the memory of a girl who left him standing at the altar of the Whetstone Baptist Church together with 150 guests, a Scottish piper and a chauffeur-driven vintage car. Apparently, Henderson ended up going on honeymoon to Barbados with his mother. No wonder he looks prematurely aged. Brainbox said that he had attended a meeting of the Madrigal Society and couldn't remember the last time he had so much fun. He added that Marigold was a diamond of a girl and that I was lucky to have snapped her up. I told him that I was no longer engaged to Marigold and that, in fact, our relationship was over. Brainbox said, "You must be devastated to lose a girl like that." Tuesday the 14th. I was scrolling through my phone when I came across Daisy's name. We had exchanged phone numbers on Boxing Day after Daisy said that she really ought to have the number of an emergency bookseller, just in case she woke in the night and needed literature. We were both a little drunk on her father's odious homemade red onion wine. I said, continuing the analogy, "My middle-of-the-night fee is probably more than you want to give." She said, "So if I rang you in the early hours and said I needed a good, Kipling, would you come?" A prude might have said we were talking dirty, a gossip that we were flirting, a pragmatist that we were networking, and a literalist that we were talking about an emergency call-out service for bibliophiles. Thursday the 23rd. I was thrilled to receive a text from Daisy today. "Dear Mr. Kipling, heard through the Leicester grapevine that you have been tossing and turning in your bed. Sounds like fun. Love, French Fancy." "Dear French Fancy, I would like to batten your berg. Kipling." Saturday the 25th. An invitation arrived this morning. It said, "Please join us on Sunday, February the 2nd from 4 p.m. at the Hoxton Gallery, London, N1, to preview a new exhibition of fecal paintings by Catherine Leidensteiner." I turned the card over and read, "Please come, it should be a hoot. French fancy." Surely fecal paintings was a misprint. Friday, January the 31st. Glenn rang to say that he is still in Cyprus, but his unit has been confined to barracks because of fighting between soldiers and the local Cypriot youth. He can now receive parcels from home. I asked him what he missed most, thinking that he would say Marmite or Cadbury's cream eggs, but he said, to my surprise, the family. Saturday, February the 1st. I have sent Glenn a parcel of improving books, Marmite and Cadbury's cream eggs. Sunday, February the 2nd. I travelled to St Pancras with Midland Main Line. I think it was a mistake to ban smoking in Carriage A, as the riffraff that used to congregate there are now dispersed throughout the train. I could not afford to take a black cab to Hoxton, but I did anyway. I was glad that I had decided to wear all black because everybody at the exhibition was similarly attired. I was handed a miniature bottle of Moet and Chandon, complete with a silver drinking straw and a catalogue. On the front cover was a picture of what I took at first glance to be a disposable nappy filled with poo. When I pushed through the throng of black-clad art aficionados into the main gallery, I saw that the walls were hung with tastefully framed, stained, disposable nappies. A woman next to me said, "They're a visceral reminder of our animalism." The man next to her murmured, "They're certainly different." Daisy slid her arms around my waist from behind and said, "What do you think of overnight nappy, Kipling?" I turned round to look at her. She was wearing a black dress that showed her beautiful arms, shoulders and breasts a la Nigella Lawson. Her black hair was loose around her sultry face. She exuded a musky sexiness that almost made me swoon. Daisy lived around the corner in a studio conversion in a building that used to make boiled sweets. Her place smelt of pineapple chunks. We were in bed together within 10 minutes of stepping into her spectacularly untidy room. I have never seen so many shoes, bags, belts and items of jewellery in one place outside a retail outlet. I only just caught the last train back to Leicester. I wanted to tell somebody about Daisy, but it was too late to ring Nigel. I went out onto the balcony. Gielgud was there, next to his wife with his head tucked under his wing. I'm glad he was asleep. It would have been ridiculous to talk to a swan, and anyway, he hates me. Monday, February the 3rd. At 5 o'clock, Daisy texted, "I'm away now until 14th. Come to London on 15th. Please." Thursday the 6th. I was harassed by Gielgud on the towpath this morning. He had murder in his eyes. Friday the 7th. I visited my parents after work. They were crouched over a small bonfire, both swathed in layers of ragged clothes. Their faces were blackened by the smoke from the fire. It was like a scene from Anthony Beevor's Stalingrad. They had made no discernible progress in knocking down the pigsties. I asked why. "Your father can't lift the sledgehammer," said my mother, with barely concealed contempt. My father got up and stirred the cooking pot. I noticed how frail and gaunt he looks these days. I felt a pang of pity for him. At this stage of his baby boomer life, he should have been sitting in his slippers by a mock gas fire in a room with 4 walls watching the Antiques Roadshow, instead of giving in to my mother's unreasonable desire to live in a converted pigsty. I told them that I would ask Darren, a plasterer of my acquaintance, if he knew of a sledgehammer operative who would be willing to knock down 2 pigsties for a pittance. Saturday the 8th. Letter from Glenn. Dear Dad, Thanks for the parcel. You could not have sent nothing better. Me and Robbie had all the Marmite on the first day. We bought a big sliced loaf from the naffy and made toast. We had the cream eggs for our pudding. They was a bit squashed, but we picked the bits of silver paper out and they was okay. I think you would like Robbie, Dad. He reads a lot of books and knows a lot about everything. There is a rumour that we are moving to Kuwait soon. Mum has wrote to tell me that she cries every night as she is worried I will be sent to Iraq. Will you go and see her for me, Dad? Also, she has got a parcel to send, but her post office on the estate has been closed down because the old people have had their pension books took off them. She says she can't queue up in the big post office in Leicester because of her veins. Love from your son, Glenn. I sat for a few moments despairing that such a bad grammarian could have sprung from my loins. When I got to the shop, I took down the Times Atlas of the World. The sight of tiny Kuwait squashed between the huge expanses of Saudi Arabia and Iraq filled me with a horrible foreboding. Sunday, February the 9th. Rang Sharon and arranged to go and see her. A thick layer of depression covered her living room. She gave me a letter to read. Dear Mum, I was wondering if you had thought any more about you and Dad getting back together. I know Dad is always moaning about things he can't do nothing about, but he is all right deep down. I know you think he's a snob, but it's just that he likes things tidy and clean. Don't worry about Pandora. Dad will never get her. She is out of his league. Why don't you ask him to come round and cook him a dinner or something? I know Dad is lonely because of all those books he reads. It's worth a try, Mum. Love from your son, Glenn. P.S. It's Robbie's birthday on February the 27th. Can you send him a card? He has not got a family because he was sent into care due to his mum knocking about with Chinese sailors and his dad knocking her about when he found out. I folded the letter and gave it back to her, unable to speak. Monday, February the 10th. Posted 2 birthday cards to Glenn's friend Robbie, one from me and one from Sharon. Darren, the plasterer, gave me the number of a bloke called Animal for my parents. He can't do a 4-piece jigsaw, Darren said, but he picks up a sledgehammer like it's a bag of feathers. Tuesday the 11th. I was locking the shop when Michael Flowers rang. He barked, I need to speak to you tonight. I'll expect you at 7. It's a matter of great importance. I do not wish to talk about it on the telephone. This phrase has always puzzled me. What else is the telephone for? I told Flowers that I would be there, though I had been looking forward to a quiet night in, preparing my clothes for the weekend in London with Daisy. Marigold was lying in a fetal position on the sofa. Netta was massaging her feet. Michael Flowers stood in front of the fireplace with his legs apart, tugging at his beard. Nobody invited me to sit down. Flowers said, 100 years ago I would have had you horsewhipped. I asked him why. He said menacingly while advancing on me, because you promised to marry my daughter, you impregnated her, and now I learn tonight that you have deserted her. Retreating slightly, I said to Marigold, why didn't you tell me? She said in a martyred voice, you no longer love me. Why should you care? I said that I would appreciate some time alone with Marigold. When her parents had left the room, I asked her how far gone she was. I don't know, she said. I'm no good at maths. I asked, have you had a pregnancy test? She shouted, yes, and it was positive, and don't ask me to get rid of it. She started to get hysterical and screamed, I will not have an abortion. Michael and Netta Flowers burst in. Marigold threw herself into Netta's arms and Netta said, "Tell us what you want to happen, darling. What would make you happy?" Marigold sobbed, "I want to keep my little baby. I want to marry Adrian and I want to live happily ever after." 5 minutes later, I left the house having promised to marry Marigold on the first Saturday in May. Stepping over the threshold of Shea Flowers is like being beamed up into the Starship Enterprise. Why, diary, am I leaving the Earth to embark on an unknown journey to cold outer space with a woman I do not love, have never found sexually attractive, and who sucks the oxygen out of my body, leaving me gasping with boredom? Wednesday the 12th. I've always liked the name Grace. Grace Pauline sounds okay. Grace Pauline Mole. Friday the 14th. I asked Mr. Carlton Hayes if he celebrated Valentine's Day. He said, "Of course. Leslie brought me a glass of pink champagne with my coffee this morning, and I gave Leslie a rather pretty antique wine stopper. Tonight we're dining at Alberto's in Market Bosworth. Why can't I frankly and fiercely hit the nail on the head, seize the pig by its tail, and simply ask Mr. Carlton Hayes if Leslie is a man or a woman?" Marigold rang and told me that she had booked a table at Healthy Options, the new restaurant in Chalk Street. Over heart-shaped strawberry tartlets, Marigold talked about the wedding arrangements. I nodded meekly, all the while thinking, "Save your breath, Marigold, there will be no wedding." I walked back along the towpath to Rat Wharf. Gielgud and his wife were gliding along the canal side by side. Perhaps they had been out to a different canal for dinner. When I got home, I found a package containing a gift-wrapped box of Mr. Kipling's French Fancies outside my door. There was no message and no card, but I knew who they were from. Saturday the 15th. I had to stand all the way on the train to London. Anti-war protesters had hogged all the seats. To my surprise, the vast majority of them looked like ordinary, respectable people. Daisy met me off the train. She was wearing a red T-shirt which said, in large black letters, "Stop the War." I was anxious to get to her flat, but she said, "We couldn't get there if we tried. There are expected to be 1 million people on the streets, sweetheart." If I had known that Daisy wanted me to march before making love with her, I would have worn more comfortable shoes. I kept quiet to her about my support for Mr. Blair, but I could not bring myself to join in with the anti-war chanting, and neither did I buy a whistle and blow it continuously. When Pandora took the microphone, Daisy listened with rapt attention. She cheered every time Pandora made a reference to the probability that Saddam's weapons of mass destruction did not exist. I wanted to stick up for Glenn and Mr. Blair, but I kept quiet. I was outnumbered by over 1,000,000 to 1. Later, in bed, Daisy said I couldn't love anybody who was a supporter of war with Iraq. I said, "Let's take a hypothetical situation, Daisy. Could you love me if I had made a sister of yours pregnant and promised to marry her on the first Saturday in May?" She didn't come to the station to see me off. I stood all the way home on the train. At Kettering, she sent me a text using some shockingly strong language. So, diary, I glimpsed paradise and then had it cruelly snatched away. Sunday the 16th. I drove through the rain and trekked across the fields to the pigsties. I could see my mother up a ladder bashing at something on the roof. My father was sitting in the doorway of the tent, sheltering from the rain. An excessively tall man with a mullet hairstyle came from behind the second pigsty, carrying a sledgehammer. I noticed that he was looking up at my mother with an adoring expression on his big face. I presumed this was animal. When we were finally sipping our tea, I said to my parents, "By the way, congratulations are in order. You're going to be grandparents again in September." My mother went totally Mediterranean, shouting, "No, no, not Marigold, please God, not Marigold." Animal rolled a cigarette with one huge hand and silently handed it to her. I said, "If it's a daughter, she might be called Grace." But I think only Animal heard me. My parents had turned their backs. I heard my father say, "We'll have to stick by him, Pauline. If he's marrying the Quorn Queen, he'll need all the help we can give." Monday the 17th. My financial situation is now desperate. The bank wrote to me today to inform me that I am overdrawn to the extent of £5,624. They have asked me to rectify this oversight and have charged me £25 for their letter. I rang Parvez tonight. He ordered me to destroy all my credit and store cards before I left the house in the morning. Tuesday the 18th. Salvation. My application to the Bank of Scotland for a MasterCard with a £10,000 limit was successful. Parvez is such a drama queen. I now have a MasterCard to put next to my Visa card. They look good together in my wallet. They have also sent me 4 cheques for £2,500 each, made out to Adrian Mole. I paid 3 into my bank to clear my overdraft. The 4th I folded and put into my wallet for emergencies. Wednesday the 19th. Met Parvez in the wine bar opposite the shop. He asked me if I had cut up my credit and store cards. I said, no, I couldn't find the scissors. Thursday the 20th. 1,000 British paratroopers flew to Kuwait today, joining the 17,000 already there. I expect that this is only sabre rattling on Mr. Blair's part. Sharon rang to ask me if there were sandflies in Kuwait and told me that when Glenn was young he was badly bitten by them on Skegness Beach. I lied and told her there were very few sandflies in Kuwait. Sunday the 23rd. I was made to go ring shopping today with Marigold. She led me to a tiny shop in an alley off the marketplace. We were attended by a snooty assistant who asked me superciliously, "What price range are we looking at, sir?" The alien from the Starship Enterprise said, "Oh, I'll leave that up to my fiancé." Marigold wanted to know the provenance, history and quality of each gem. She eventually set her heart on a platinum, diamond and sapphire ring costing £1,399. I affected nonchalance on being informed of the price. The assistant asked if we wanted to choose wedding rings before the price of gold went through the roof. Faced with his pushy salesmanship and Marigold's eagerness, I agreed to cast my eye over a tray of rings. After a while, they all looked the same. Marigold chose a ring for me. When it was on the appropriate finger, I felt my lifeblood ebb away. When told that the 3 rings came to a total of £3,517, I nodded mutely and wrote out a cheque. Wednesday the 26th. Mr. Carlton Hayes brought his little Roberts radio into the shop today. He wanted to listen to the parliamentary debate, after which the Commons was to vote on whether or not this country goes to war with Iraq. He told me Pandora Braithwaite has announced she will be voting against the government. When we heard that the government had, with the backing of the Conservative Party, won the debate, Mr. Carlton Hayes said quietly, "So, we are going to war." He sat down in an armchair next to the dying embers in the fireplace. Lay awake for hours. If Saddam's weapons of mass destruction can reach Cyprus, they can certainly hit Kuwait, where Glenn is now stationed. I wanted to ring Daisy and tell her how worried I was about Glenn, but she is refusing to take my calls. Wednesday, March the 5th. Mr. Blair and Mr. Bush stand alone against tyranny. Our Prime Minister has been making the speeches of his lifetime. His nostrils flare and his eyes blaze with passion. What an actor he would have made. The National Theatre's loss is the British public's gain. Sunday, March the 9th. Gruesome Sunday lunch at BB on the Wold, only redeemed by Daisy's presence. It was impossible to tell whether A, she still loved me and would keep quiet about our brief affair, or B, she loved me but was so eaten up by jealousy and rage she would denounce me in front of her family, or C, she no longer loved me and didn't care if I married Marigold or not. After lunch, I saw her in the hallway. She said, "I've got to get out of here. I'm going to catch the last train back to London." I said, "The station is on the way to Rat Wharf. I'll give you a lift." There were protests from Marigold and her parents, but I didn't care. We started undressing as we were climbing the stairs at Rat Wharf. Within seconds of opening the front door, we were on the futon, and I was enveloped in the musky softness of Daisy's body. Monday, March the 10th, 2003. I sat with a writing pad and pen for over an hour trying to compose a letter to Marigold. All I managed was, "Dear Marigold, this is the most difficult letter I have ever had to write." Tuesday, March the 11th. Dear Marigold, this will be a very difficult letter to write, but I can no longer live a lie. The truth is, Marigold, that I am not nearly good enough for you. You outclass me in looks, intelligence, and in your marvellous ability to construct dolls' houses from waste materials. I am not worthy of your love, dearest. Try to forget that you ever knew me. I will, of course, provide for the baby and be as good a father to him/her as I can in the circumstances. Yours, with thanks for the good times, Adrian. I put it in an envelope, affixed a stamp, wrote the address, and took it to the post box. But I could not deliver the final coup de grace. I put the envelope back in my pocket and walked home to Rat Wharf. Wednesday the 12th. Dear Marigold, can I be honest with you? I have recently discovered that I am gay. The signs have been there for some time. I almost bought a chandelier recently. I have taken to wearing rubber gloves while doing my housework, and I have noticed myself using waspish humour as a method of communication. I have not yet taken the plunge sexually, but it can only be a matter of time before I meet a man with whom I can share a civil union. The rings cost me rather a lot of money. Perhaps you could ask if they will take them back. If so, please use the money to buy whatever you need for the baby. I hope we can remain friends. Yours, Adrian. Thursday the 13th. I drove out to the piggeries and sat for a while with Animal and my parents. There is something very comforting about a bonfire. When I got back to Rat Wharf, I wrote another letter. My dearest Marigold, I can no longer live a lie. For some time I have been dressing in female clothes and calling myself Brenda. I love the feel of silk, lace and winceyette on my rough male flesh. I will entirely understand if, in the circumstances, you run from me like a startled fawn, but when you do, try to remember me with compassion. None of us can help our genetic makeup. Yours ever, Brenda. P.S. What is the name of that divine blue eyeshadow you wore on Boxing Day? I must have it. Friday the 14th. My mother rang me at work. She said, I'm worried about you. I thought you looked terrible last night. You're not happy, are you, love? For some reason, tears came into my eyes and I couldn't get my breath. I think it must have been the kindness, perhaps the motherliness in her voice that set me off. It's a tone I haven't heard often enough in my life. Mr. Carlton Hayes handed me a clean white handkerchief. I blew my nose and tried to hand it back to him, but he said, No, keep it, my dear. Leslie always sends me out with 2 clean handkerchiefs in the morning. I said he was lucky to have somebody to care for him so well. He said, not lucky, blessed. I tried to apologise for my uncharacteristic behaviour. He said, I'm not awfully good at the heart-to-heart stuff, I'm afraid. Leslie says it's the fault of being sent away to public school, but if you find it helpful to what I believe is called unload, then I would be very happy to listen. I could tell that he was deeply uncomfortable and was relieved when a mad woman bag lady came in shouting that Jane Austen was inside her head telling her what to do. This evening I sat down again with pad and pen. Dear Marigold, can I be honest with you? The man you know as Adrian Mole is an imposter. I have been on the run since I was falsely accused of violating a dolphin off the Cornish coast in 1989. The police are closing in on me, so I must go underground. Farewell, dearest, Malcolm Roach, a.k.a. Adrian Mole. I didn't think she'd believe this, so I wrote another. Dearest Marigold, for some years I have been suffering from a rare medical condition which produces a murderous rage, which in turn makes me prone to sudden fits of violence. Alas, I have been told by a specialist in my condition that there is no cure. The specialist has advised me not to marry. Naturally, I am gutted by this news and beg you to give me time and space in which to grieve for what could have been. Love, as ever, A. Saturday the 15th. I gave the letters to Mr. Carlton Hayes and asked him for his advice. To my surprise, he seemed to find them quite amusing. He said, none of them are quite suitable, my dear. If I were you, I would write something like, My dear Marigold, you are a lovely woman, and I'm frightfully sorry about this, but I now realise that I do not love you enough to want to marry you. In these circumstances, it would be terribly silly of us to get married. I will, of course, support you and the child. I'm most awfully sorry to be such a frightful cad, but I feel honour bound to tell you the horrid truth. Please do not contact me. Yours truly, Adrian. I thanked him, but I will not send it. Sunday the 16th. Email from Daisy with the draft of a letter attached. Dear Marigold, it is not your fault that you have grown up to be a manipulative, hysterical hypochondriac. You have been hopelessly indulged by your parents. You have taken advantage of my kind, gentle nature and have drained me emotionally and financially. But hey, I'll recover. Keep the poxy ring. Thanks for the good times. Not Adrian. P.S. I think it must be obvious from the above that I will not be marrying you on the 6th of May, 2003. I was shocked at the harsh tone of Daisy's letter. Am I jumping out of the frying pan and into the wok? I needed to be with the two people who would, despite our differences, give me unconditional love, so I drove to the piggeries. My mother threw down her cigarette and gave me a tight embrace. She said, You're a bag of bones. I'm going to cook you a full English breakfast with fried bread. My stomach was indifferent, but my heart was nourished. I gave my parents the Marigold letters to read. My father's advice was, Send her the dangerous nutter ones, son. My mother said, They're all ridiculous. She then drafted one herself. Dear Marigold, ever since I was a little boy, I have preferred to live in the world of fiction. I have found the real world to be a harsh place. I avoid confrontation and am easily manipulated. I am very sorry, but I cannot marry you. I do not love you. The truth is, I love your sister, Daisy, and I think she loves me. I said, How long have you known about Daisy? My mother asked, Is it true? I said, Yes. My father said, She's a cracker. My mother advised me to snap her up quickly before she goes off the boil. I went home to Rat Wharf and wrote the letter I decided I would definitely send to Marigold. Dear Marigold, I hope you are well. I am quite well, apart from a constant feeling of dread that I can't seem to shake off. I have some grave news, I'm afraid. Marigold, I can't marry you on May the 6th or on any other date. You are a beautiful, intelligent woman, and your skill at making miniature furniture is breathtaking. The sad truth is that I am unworthy of you. I have many psychological flaws that prevent me from making any woman happy. I will, of course, support you financially and practically when the baby is born, and will have him/her on alternate Sundays from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. If wet, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Please do not contact me. I am already in pain, and to hear your voice would cause me considerable agony. Yours, Adrian. Tuesday the 18th. My mother rang me at the shop. She said, "Your father hurt his back trying to lift a hod of bricks. He's been taken to the Royal Hospital. She told me that he would have to have an operation to remove 2 damaged discs. I asked her if it would affect his mobility. She said, "I don't think so. Your dad's always been a bit spineless." Thursday, March the 20th. The war with Iraq started today. The American military has promised a massive shock and awe assault that will make the world quiver in its boots with respect. When I got home from work, I switched on my home entertainment centre. The sound of the bombardment reverberated around the apartment. The screen was filled with huge orange explosions against the black Baghdad sky. I was very shocked and totally awed. I had to remind myself that this was happening in real time to real people. I thought about the little Iraqi kids who must be terrified. What would their mums and dads be saying to them? I wondered what Mr. Blair would be saying to his own children about the bombs falling on Baghdad. Friday the 21st. On the little radio in the shop, I heard that 8 British and 4 American servicemen had been killed when a helicopter crashed over Kuwait. Daisy sent me an email. "Sorry, but I can't get over this war thing. I am outraged at Britain's involvement in the whole filthy business. Have you changed your mind since the bombing started? Please say yes, because I do love you." Saturday the 22nd. I phoned Daisy. She said, "Have you changed your mind about the war?" I said no, that I still supported Mr. Blair and the country should rally round and support him in his hour of need. She snarled, "Don't ring, don't text, don't contact me again. I asked you to choose between me and Tony Blair, and you chose him. Goodbye." Sunday the 23rd. My father has had his operation. He was back on the ward complaining that the nurses won't push his bed into the lift, take him down 6 floors and push him to the main entrance so that he can have a cigarette. I took him a bunch of grapes. Tomorrow I will take him a bunch of nicotine patches. Tuesday, March the 25th. A letter from Michael Flowers. Adrian, Netta and I are deeply disappointed in you. Your neglect of and apparent indifference to Marigold is tantamount to cruelty. She is having a difficult pregnancy caused, I am sure, by your callous refusal to marry her. We are sufficiently concerned about our daughter's health to have booked a recuperative holiday for her on the island of Capri, at a charming hotel we have stayed at many times. Netta will accompany her, and I am writing to ask you to contribute towards their lodging and travel expenses. As you know, I am a poor man. My mission in life, to educate the people of Leicester in correct nutritional practices, has largely failed. Your contribution to Marigold's recuperative holiday is £999.50. Yours in peace, Michael. I did a long and complicated calculation and discovered that I have no money in my current account and none available on either of my credit cards. However, it would be good to get Marigold out of the country and off my conscience for 2 weeks, so I have no choice but to break into my hitherto sacred Building Society deposit account. At lunchtime, I withdrew £1,000 of my precious life savings. Thursday, March the 27th, 2003. At midday, Secretary of State for Defence Jeff Hoon announced that British forces have evidence that Iraq is ready to use chemical weapons against Allied forces. I sent a text message to Late Sun Limited. Weapons of mass destruction have been found. Please refund my deposit and apologise. An ex-customer, A.A. Mole. Saturday, March the 29th. At 6:30, my mother rang from my father's hospital bedside to say it had just been reported that a Tomahawk missile had landed near Kuwait City. She said, "Have you heard if our Glen is safe?" I said, "The commander of British forces in the Gulf, General Mike Jackson, did not have my mobile number." She said, "There's no need to be sarcastic, Adrian." I asked her, "Is it tonight we have to change the clocks?" She said that it was. I asked if it was forwards or backwards. I can never remember which. She said, "It's easy. Spring forward, fall back." I said, "But do the clocks go backwards or forwards?" She said again, "Spring forward, fall back." I broke off the call saying I had left something in the oven. I can't talk to her when she is in one of her moods. Tuesday, April the 1st. Glenn rang me to wish me a happy birthday for tomorrow. I asked him where he was and he said, "I can't tell you exactly where, that's classified information, but I'm still in that country that begins with a K and there's still a lot of sand about." It was on the tip of my tongue to tell him how much I loved him and worried about him, but I couldn't quite manage to get the words out. Watched Midlands Today. The first item was about a pensioner from Nottingham who had beaten off a mugger with a cucumber. The second item was about the rescue of a dog called Butch who had been stuck down a drain for 3 days. The third item showed Pandora Braithwaite standing on Westminster Green opposite the Houses of Parliament, announcing that she had resigned from her job as a junior minister in the Department of the Environment. She looked sad and angry and beautiful. She said that she would continue to work tirelessly for her constituents in Ashby-de-la-Zouch, but she cannot support the invasion of Iraq. Wednesday, April the 2nd. My birthday. I am 35 today. I am officially middle-aged. It is all downhill from now. A pathetic slide towards gum disease, wheelchair ramps and death. I do not feel able to celebrate. Not with Glenn at war. After work, I drove my mother to the hospital. My father has recovered quite well from his operation and is alert enough to be keeping notes of everything that goes wrong with his treatment. I opened the present that Marigold had sent round to the bookshop at my father's bedside. It was a birthday cake that would not have been out of place on a bird table. Call me old school, but I think a birthday cake should have jam, icing and candles. People who make birthday cakes with whole grain flour and decorate them with sunflower seeds should be given a community service order and be compelled to go to punitive cake-making classes. Am I becoming more right-wing now that I'm middle-aged? The Allied bombers are making 1,000 sorties a day. Shock and awe does not appear to have worked so far. I want Daisy so badly my toes curl whenever I think of her. Thursday the 3rd. Gielgud and his wife, who from now on I will call Margot after Margot Fontaine, the ballet dancer, are building a monolithic nest directly opposite my balcony. They don't know how lucky they are. It costs them nothing and they don't have to go to IKEA. Both my credit card bills arrived. I was shocked. My MasterCard is over the agreed £10,000 limit and they are demanding £200 immediately. Barclaycard wrote to ask if I wanted to join their wine club for a minimum payment of £222 to be paid within 28 days. I ticked the box to order a selection of 12 bottles of New World wines. Friday the 4th. A letter from Robbie, Glenn's best friend, written in a good, clear hand. Dear Mr. Mole, thank you very much for the birthday card and also the books. I would be very grateful if you could see your way to sending some more. I have enclosed a cheque to cover the cost of the books and postage. Glenn got me a cake made by the lads in the field kitchen. I don't know how they managed it because things are a bit tricky here. Yours sincerely, Robbie. Sunday the 13th. Nigel rang to tell me that he is suffering from post-blindness depression. In an attempt to counsel him, I asked him what was the worst thing about being blind. Nigel snapped, "I can't bloody see." I asked him if he would like to go with me to visit my father in hospital. He said grudgingly, "If that's all that's on offer." My father didn't look well today. The post-operative wound in his back has become infected and he is running a high temperature. A defeated-looking cleaner called Edna was mopping rancid water from a bucket around his bed. She said, "When I finish cleaning the ward, I'll come back and freshen you up." Monday the 14th. I have signed another of the Barclaycard loan cheques and paid it into my account. I think, but I'm not sure, that I am now hopelessly in debt. Michael Flowers rang and asked me to drive Marigold and Netta to Birmingham Airport. He said, "You'll need to be at BB on the Wold by 4 a.m. on Wednesday at the latest." I heard myself agreeing to this. Wednesday the 16th. Marigold emerged from the house wearing a smock-type thing, what looked like maternity trousers and Birkenstocks. Netta was similarly attired. During the journey to Birmingham Airport, they discussed what the baby would be called and decided between them that Rowan would suit both sexes. I was not consulted. On the return journey, my rearview mirror told me that I looked 10 years younger. For the first time in my life, I forgot to be frightened and drove at 70 miles an hour down the fast lane of the M6. Friday the 18th. Glenn is 18 today. I hope to God that he is not sent to Iraq. My nerves won't stand the daily agony of wondering where he is and what he's doing. I went round to see Nigel, who now has a blind dog. When I asked him what the blind dog was called, he snapped, "Graham is not a blind dog. A blind dog would be no sodding use to me, would it? Graham is a guide dog." Sunday the 20th. My home entertainment centre blew up this morning, preventing me from following the progress of the war. I phoned Brainbox Henderson and asked him to give me some cheap advice over the phone. He said, "I'm at a bit of a loose end, Mole. I'll come round and do an on-site appraisal, FOC. Perhaps we can have a spot of lunch later." The prospect of spending most of the day with Brainbox Henderson filled me with dread, but I had worked out what FOC meant, and if he could reconnect me to the outside world free of charge, I judged it to be a price worth paying. Brainbox turned up at 11:30. He said, "You're running too many plugs from the one socket and it's overheated." I laughed mirthlessly and said, "You've just described my life perfectly." When he had got everything working, we watched CNN for a while. I felt my chest constrict and my palms sweat when footage was shown of British soldiers patrolling the streets of Basra. I asked Brainbox if he had any children. He automatically made the usual male joke and said, "None that I know of." Then his face twitched a bit and he said, "I'd love to have a kid, but the girl I wanted to have them with left me standing at the altar. I'm not like you, Mole. I'm not very good with women." I said, "Brainbox, I'm disastrous with women. My romantic life is a shambles." Brainbox said, "But you're marrying one of the loveliest women I've ever met." I said, "Haven't you heard? The wedding is off." He said, "Does that mean Marigold's free?" I said, making a small joke, "She's not free, Brainbox. She's cost me a fortune." Brainbox said quietly, "Money's no problem. I've got nobody to spend it on but myself." I told him that if he wanted to meet women, he should hang around wine bars or the patisserie counter in Sainsbury's. He said, "I do all my shopping online. Anyway, I've met the girl I want to marry. It's Marigold." I said, "But she's having my baby." He said, "It wouldn't bother me. You're fairly intelligent and not bad looking. I'd give your kid everything it needed, and I know I can make Marigold happy." I said that I would do everything in my power to help him win Marigold's affection. I called in at the piggeries this afternoon. My mother and Animal were in the tent with all the flaps down when I arrived. When she eventually stumbled outside, I asked her what she'd been doing. She said, Animal was helping me deflea the dog. The roof is on the first pigsty. My mother is certainly getting her money's worth out of Animal. Tuesday the 22nd. I was buying mangoes at the market at lunchtime when I bumped into Michael Flowers. He told me that he had heard from Netta in Capri. The hotel was marvellous and Marigold had recovered her spirits. Mother and daughter had been undergoing various therapies. Wednesday the 23rd. The phone call I have been dreading. Glenn rang to say he was now stationed just outside Basra in southern Iraq. How is it possible that my son has gone to war? Since the day the boy came to live with me, I have made myself responsible for his well-being. I made sure he ate a reasonable diet, that he wore his vest in the winter, that he took his hay fever pills when the Met Office warned of a high pollen count. I used to lie awake worrying when he started going to the town on Friday nights and didn't come home on the last bus. Whenever he left the house, I'd remind him to use pedestrian crossings and avoid eye contact with drunken strangers. And now the boy is in Iraq without my protection, and there's nothing I can do. Tuesday, April the 29th. Marigold is too ill to travel and is being forced to stay for another 2 weeks in Capri. I have to admit that Brainbox is a marvel with technology. Within half an hour, he had booked a flight to Naples, a ferry to Capri, and himself into the Hotel Splendid. Thursday, May the 1st. George Bush has declared an end to major military combat in Iraq, so the war is officially over. Glenn rang tonight. I asked him when he was coming home. He said, "Not for 6 months. I'm on peacekeeping duties, Dad." I asked him if there was anything he wanted. He said some body armour would be appreciated. Me and Robbie are sharing ours. Friday the 2nd. I phoned the Hotel Splendid in Capri and told Marigold that Brainbox Henderson was arriving with cash to pay for her extended holiday. She did not sound displeased. Just then I heard Brainbox's high-pitched laugh and Marigold squealed, "Bruce, I can't believe you're here." Then the phone went dead. Thursday, May the 15th. Credit card bills were waiting for me when I got home from work. I was too depressed to open them. I put them in the kitchen gadget drawer, the one I never use. Wednesday, May the 14th, 2003. Bruce Brainbox Henderson called into the shop today. He is transformed. He went to Capri, a geeky computer boff, and has arrived back in Leicester, a tanned Lothario. I asked him how things stood between him and Marigold. He stammered, "She's an amazing girl. She made a tiny sunbed out of a matchbox, a few matches and a scrap of cloth. We talked for hours. Marigold is very bitter. She said you prefer characters in books to people in real life." I said, "So what is your precise relationship with Marigold now?" He said, "I want to marry her." Wednesday, May the 21st. A letter from Glenn. Dear Dad, is there a book in your shop that tells people how to stop being scared? I am scared every time I go on patrol in Basra. Sometimes it is so bad that I am shaking. I don't think anybody has noticed yet. It's just that I am worried that if trouble starts, I will let the rest of the lads down. Loads of love from your son, Glenn. P.S. Don't tell Mum I am scared. Tell her I am having a good laugh and getting a suntan. Friday the 23rd. Dear Glenn, please find enclosed a copy of How to Master Your Fear. I found this useful when I developed a phobia of driving on the M6. Mr. Carlton Hayes has sent you and Robbie an anthology of poetry written by a soldier in the First World War called Siegfried Sassoon. I think about you all the time, son. Be assured you are in Iraq fighting for a good cause. Much love, from Dad. Sunday the 25th. Brainbox and Marigold visited. They can hardly keep their hands off each other. It was sickening, diary. They want to get married and had come to ask me for my blessing and to talk about the unborn child. Brainbox said, I'm keen to adopt the baby, Adrian. I'm quite prepared to help you out financially. I know you are strapped for cash. I said, I don't want to sell my parental rights. Then I casually asked Marigold how Daisy was. She said, with some satisfaction, Daisy's had to move back home. She got thrown out of her flat for trashing the place when she was drunk. I have to see her, diary. Monday the 26th. I made a vow to myself that I would win Daisy back, marry her, and have children with her. Saturday, May the 31st. Daisy, at my front door, she said, you have to read this. She handed me a pink silk-covered diary with a lock and said, turn to May 25th. I read, Bruce and I went to see Adrian today. I wanted to tell Bruce in the car that I'm not having a baby, that I've been telling lies to everybody, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I am frightened of losing him. Daisy said, I picked the lock. I thought you ought to know, seeing as you were the father of the phantom kid. Sunday, June the 1st. No sleep last night. Daisy and I drank 3 bottles of wine and ate 2 bags of Doritos and a large bowl of salsa. Pudding was a ripe mango which we devoured in the bath, naked. Tuesday, June the 3rd. I need Daisy to light my life. Without her, I will never metamorphose from caterpillar to moth. I noticed that Donald Rumsfeld is now saying that the weapons of mass destruction may never be found. This came as a considerable shock. Wednesday the 4th. 2 credit card bills demanding payment immediately. I had no choice but to withdraw the last £3,000 from my Building Society deposit account. Where has all the money gone? I've nothing to show for it, apart from the futon and a few pots and pans. Saturday the 14th. Daisy and I agreed that we would go to BB on the Wold and give Marigold an opportunity to confess her deception. However, as we were dressing, Brainbox rang and said, Adrian, I've got some bad news for you. I'm afraid that Marigold lost the baby. He sounded very sad. I hadn't the heart to tell him the truth. Instead, I said, I'm sure you will give her lots of babies in the years to come, Brainbox. Sunday the 15th. Father's Day. It is certainly Father's Day for Gielgud today. 7 signets passed my balcony this morning. Glenn texted from Iraq to say, Happy Father's Day, no cards in shops, no shops. There was nothing from William. Monday the 16th. Glenn phoned. I wanted to say that I loved him, and I was sorry I'd let him down when he was a little kid. Instead, I told him that I'd sent him and Robbie more books, and that they should reach him soon. Tuesday the 17th. Mr. Carlton Hayes showed me a letter he had received. Dear Mr. Carlton Hayes, thank you for the volume of Siegfried Sassoon's war poetry. He knew what he was on about, that's for sure. I have learned Survivors off by heart. Thanking you once again, Robbie. Saturday, July the 5th. Letter from Glenn. Dear Dad, I don't know what I'm doing here. Half the people are glad Saddam has gone, and half the people are trying to kill us. Trouble is, we can't tell which is which no more. I'm fed up with people trying to blow me up, Dad. If anything happens to me, promise you will look after Mum. Tuesday, July the 8th. A letter from my personal account manager at Barclays Bank ordering me not to write any further cheques. Thursday the 10th. Letter from mortgage company demanding an immediate payment. After 2 glasses of red wine, I went to the gadget drawer and opened all the letters inside. It was worse than I thought. Wednesday the 16th. Meeting with Parvez. He said, "I've spoken to the Inland Revenue, Mole, and it ain't good news. The taxman says you owe £72,800 for unpaid tax between 1996 and 1999. He let this sink in and then added, plus interest." Thursday the 17th. I am low physically and mentally. I must face the unpalatable truth. I have brought disaster on my own head. Tuesday the 22nd. Robbie is dead, killed by shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade. An officer from his regiment knocked on my door last night. My first reaction was relief that it wasn't Glenn. I asked why I had been formally notified. He said, "Robert put you down as his next of kin." I wanted to cry, but I couldn't in front of this good man who had been deputed to break the news of death. Half an hour later, the phone call I was dreading. It was Glenn. He said, "You told me that I was fighting for democracy, Dad, but Robbie's dead. You're my dad. You shouldn't have let me go to Iraq. You should have stopped me." I let him shout and swear at me and didn't try to defend myself, because he was correct in everything he said. Wednesday the 23rd. I am morally, spiritually and financially bankrupt. Stayed in bed all day. Switched my phone off. Friday the 25th. Stayed in bed all morning. At 6:30, Mr. Carlton Hayes came round. We sat on the balcony and watched the young swans. He asked me why I hadn't phoned him. I told him that I had been paralysed with shame and couldn't bring myself to communicate with anybody. I said, "I believed them when they told me our country needed to go to war, and I even encouraged my son to go to fight." I confessed that I had been living wildly beyond my means and that I was now being forced to sell my apartment. I also told him I had been having an affair with Marigold's sister, Daisy. He said, "Love makes fools of us all. Leslie and I left our partners for each other 30-odd years ago. It caused the most dreadful scandal at the time, but hardly a day goes by when I don't look at Leslie and think that I did the right thing." He made me promise that I would come into work tomorrow. He said that we were doing very good business lately thanks to the recent innovations, and he wanted to talk about my salary. Saturday the 26th. I went into work and was given an affectionate welcome from Mr. Carlton Hayes. He told me, blushing and stammering, that he and Leslie had agreed that the shop could afford to pay me an extra £200 a month. I blushed and stammered my thanks. Saturday, July the 21st, 2004. Today is the first anniversary of Robbie's death. My mother brought a letter round this morning. Adrian Mole, The Old Pigsty, Bottom Field. Dear Mr. Mole, Mr. Tony Blair has conceded that there were no weapons of mass destruction within reach of Cyprus that could be deployed within 45 minutes. I hope that you will now desist from harassing me for the return of your deposit. Johnny Bond, Lateson Limited. Daisy and I pushed Gracie into Mangold Parva to buy a Leicester Mercury. On the way back to the piggeries, we passed my mother and Animal, who were foraging in the hedgerows and feeding the occasional berry to my father in his wheelchair. There were 2 notices on the Mercury in Memoriam page. One from me. Stainforth, Private Robert Patrick, died on July 21st, 2003, on active duty in Iraq. He was sent there because vainglorious, arrogant men wanted war, and he died a terrible death. He was 18 years old. And the other from Glenn. Robbie, you were the best mate ever. This is the poem you learned off by heart. Survivors. No doubt they'll soon get well. The shock and strain have caused their stammering, disconnected talk. Of course they're longing to go out again. These boys, with old scared faces learning to walk. They'll soon forget their haunted nights, their cowed subjection to the ghosts of friends who died, their dreams that drip with murder, and they'll be proud of glorious war that shattered all their pride. Men who went out to battle grim and glad, children with eyes that hate you, broken and mad. Sunday, July the 22nd. Happy people don't keep a diary, I said to Daisy this morning in bed. She said, "So why are you starting one again?" I said, "I'm thinking of writing an autobiography." She said, "Kipling, I think you're fantastically interesting, but I'm not sure other people will. You live in a pigsty with your wife and baby, bike to work, play with Gracie, work on the garden, go to bed, read, make love and sleep. What's to write about?"
Adrian